So with my colleagues, what I was trying to look at was this question of online social media and how that's impacting our work lives. Social media is really all around us in recent years, and we see this in organizations in terms of how organizations are using it to market, et cetera. But how it affects people's work lives is what we were interested in. And this is really where the title, When Worlds Collide, comes into play. We were really interested in how the personal and professional lives of employees can become blurred on online social media. And so this is where we really see both opportunity but also challenge for people. One of our, we did some interviews as we were doing this work, and one of our interviewees said social media or social minefield, right? And that really sums up really beautifully, I think, the inherent paradox here. We have both a new world opening up for us where social media has so many amazing opportunities to connect and to enhance relationships and to build new relationships, but it also poses challenges for us as we think about how to manage the relationships that we have. One of the big challenges is this notion of the invisible audience. When we connect to people on Facebook or on Twitter or Instagram, there are some people who are really following us and are responding to us or liking us or favoriting us, or they're very visible because they're interacting with us in a much more visible way. But there's often a whole host of people who are invisible, who are just sort of in the background, who are watching what we're saying or doing, but are not actively responding. And what happens is that we can oftentimes forget about them when we're posing these, when we're posing questions, when we're posting information. And what'll happen is sometimes that information that we post has some unintended effects in terms of how people respond to us. And that's really what we were focusing on in this research, focusing on what are the consequences of different online social media strategies that people have. We identified 4 strategies that people use. Now, these are archetypal strategies. People might use a hybrid of these as well. But the 4 strategies that we identified were the first is called the open strategy. So this is where the people who are willing to connect to anyone and everyone, and they post anything and everything, right? So the good, bad, the ugly. They'll reveal, they'll share it with everybody, and this is sort of the strategy of authenticity, openness, trying to connect broadly and fully. That's the open strategy. The second strategy that we identified was one where people are much more careful about the audience that they choose to connect to, and we called that the audience strategy as a result. So they limit the audience who they are conferring with, and this, by the way, helps with the invisible audience problem that I mentioned earlier. They also, though, will use a strategy of authenticity. So they've carefully curated who their audience is, but they will express fully the good, bad, and the ugly to that carefully chosen audience. Okay? The third strategy is what we call the content strategy. So here, people will choose to connect broadly to multiple audiences, but they will carefully instead curate their content. They will pick and choose what kinds of information to post. They will typically choose things to post that is more self-enhancing, that manages the impression that they're giving to other people. And so we call that the content strategy. The last strategy is what we call the custom strategy. These are folks who carefully manage the worlds where they separate the audiences. They'll connect to multiple audiences, but they'll carefully manage what gets seen by which audience. And so this is a more difficult strategy to manage if you need to have some technologically sophisticated skills, and you need to monitor it, right? And so this is where, for example, on Facebook, there are things like lists that you can use where you have different lists, and you have one list see maybe everything, and then another list see only a sub-selection of what you're posting. And so this strategy will, again, allow you to connect broadly, but it will allow you to verify and to, be authentic to one set of your audiences, but to be more careful about what another audience sees. So each of these strategies has important consequences for respect and liking. So in the workplace, how you're seen professionally by others, right? And one of the things that we see is that the open strategy might be very, very, it might make you likable, deeply likable to some people. But again, with that invisible audience, there could be a whole bunch of people who might be offended even by some of the things. So if you're posting political views, some of your audience might be rah, rah, right with you, and others are kind of silently a little bit taken aback by what you're expressing, right? And so there are some different consequences in terms of these different strategies. The audience strategy allows you typically to, preserve the respect of others around you, but not necessarily enhance it if you're not connecting with them. The custom strategy is the one which we would argue has the highest sort of ability to both maximize respect and liking, but it's hard to do. And if you make a mistake, then it can have a backlash, because then people realize, oh, wow, you're actively managing this and you're managing me, et cetera. The content strategy also will have the opportunity to enhance professional respect and liking, but again, you could go overboard on that. If you're too, enhancing, people might be put off by that, right? And so there might be some backlash there as well. So all of these have trade-offs, and they need to be chosen carefully. We have a couple of different thoughts about how to do that. So I think that there's a couple of different steps that you want to think about when you think about the strategy that you're choosing and what the consequences are for your online social media presence and how that affects your professional reputation. So firstly, you need to choose your strategy. Think about what your strategy is and what it should be, right? Maybe what you're doing isn't what you should be doing, right? So be thoughtful about what your strategy is. Secondly, you want to think about what your goals are on social media. Is your goal to express yourself or to impress others, right? So thinking about whether you want to let the good, bad, and the ugly all hang out, and whether you want everybody to see that, or whether you want to be more aware of your professional reputation and what the impact that has on others and how that's seen by others, right? And so the impression management piece may be more important in terms of your goal. The third piece that we really think is important in terms of how you manage this behavior is to also assess your fit with the professional context that you're in. So if you're a lawyer and you may not be able to be connected with a judge on online social media because there are regulations around that. However, if you're in a technology startup company, the norm and the culture may be that all of you are connected and that's how you interact, and you do online chat and you do Facebook and you do Instagram, and all of that is part of how you relate to your coworkers. And so you need to be really aware of both your personal preferences as well as your environment and how that all fits together. So I think that the Gaff is actually really important because I think people are very inertial in terms of their strategies until they either have something where there's a big sort of gaffe that happens where they get negative feedback about what happened, or if they are switching their professional context, right? There's usually some impetus for people to change their strategy. It doesn't happen that frequently. So as an example, one of our interviewees had a situation where she worked at a synagogue, and her rabbi had asked her if he could connect with her on Facebook. And so she said sure. She was very active on Facebook. And one of the things this is a Reform synagogue where they, you know, they abide by a lot of the, you know, regulations that the more strict Jews would, but it was not necessarily. It's not as strict, right? And so she was posting a picture of her son who was playing a soccer game on a Saturday, and so her rabbi saw that and said to her, you know, as an employee of the synagogue, I don't think it's a good idea for you to be posting a picture of your son, even though it's this wholesome soccer game on a Saturday, because it's giving the, you know, the wrong impression because it's Shabbat and he shouldn't be playing soccer on a Saturday. And she was really taken aback by this and was a little surprised, and she ended up unfriending him as a result. But it was really, I mean, it was a real wake-up call to her that, you know, she needed to be more aware of who was in her audience. And so, you know, these gaffes really do, I think, sometimes make people much more aware of what strategy they have. So sometimes gaffes can be good because they bring to light what your strategy is, and if you do need to correct it, because you need to be much more aware of how people are responding to you. So our research shows that what's changed really is that people need to be much more careful about thinking about their communication strategy. When we communicate face-to-face or over the phone or dyadically or in a small group, typically what happens is we automatically tailor our communications to our audiences. We read their facial expressions, we look at their nonverbals, their body language. We usually know something about them, and so we're more careful about how we are, automatically careful about how we are tailoring what we are saying and how we're saying it. In online social media, what's happened is that the whole point is that we're connected to a broad audience, right? And that's really the purpose of it. But what happens is it makes it much more difficult to tailor our communications in an effective way. And there are, as we were talking about earlier, there are gaffes that people can make where they are not tailoring their communications in a way that they would just naturally do in these other media, right? And so one of there's some really spectacular examples from the media recently. There was a U.S. Marine Corps member who was running a Tea Party website, Facebook page, and what he did was he posted negative comments about Obama, not really realizing and forgetting about the fact that there was actually a policy, a Pentagon policy that limits the free speech rights of their military members. And so what ended up happening was he was discharged, not honorably, because he had really violated this policy when he said something extremely negative about Obama. There was another example that involved Twitter, where Bob Parsons, who was the CEO of GoDaddy, he was an avid game hunter, and he had gone and he posted a video of himself, you know, I think shooting elephants in Zimbabwe, and PETA got and posted this on Twitter, and PETA really got very, very exercised about this, and he ended up having to step down as CEO. And so there are a lot of ways in which we see that this new online social media has opened up doors, right? Opened up amazing doors in terms of allowing us to connect really broadly and impactfully in ways that personalize who we are and make people feel connected to us. But it also has the challenge of how do we do this in a consistent and positive way such that we don't have some of these really spectacular disasters that can befall, or even small disasters that can befall us along the way. We're going a lot of different directions. One of the directions that I'm really excited about is a project that's looking at online social media and how that helps with teams. One of the things that is really challenging in today's environment is we're oftentimes working in global teams where everybody's not co-located. So we're interested in seeing how online social media can be really positive for people who are working in non-co-located teams, and asking the question, do some of these online social media strategies help more than others? Another way that we're looking at going forward in this research is looking at the question of hierarchy. One of the things that came up in a lot of the interviews that we did with folks initially around online social media usage was the question of hierarchy and how the online relationship is thinking about connecting with your boss, thinking about connecting with your subordinates. So once you cross those hierarchical lines, how does that really impact your work relationships? A lot of our interview subjects actually likened their boss, being Facebook friends, for example, with their boss, to being Facebook friends with their mothers. And so, that hierarchical line, I think, is a really important one. And we're also doing some research trying to understand how people react to that and what the consequences are for crossing those lines in the workplace.